Hi there. Tony O'Dowd is Head of Research at Keyword Studios. Tony has many years' experience in the localization, machine translation, and speech AI space. I've always found Tony to be fascinating to listen to. I hope you enjoy our chat. So, Tony, tell me, how did you get from way back when you started in industry to here into this phenomenal whole area of AI?
Sure. Well, it started a long time ago, about 25 to 30 years ago, when I was a lecturer in Trinity College. And my background was always in computer science. And lecturing in Trinity gave me some great ideas in terms of how to set up my own business and set up some ideas and commercialize those ideas. And the first company that hired me, believe it or not, in the computer industry was a company called Lotus Development Corporation. And that was the world's largest development company at the time. And Lotus was famous for only one product, which was Lotus 123, right, which was a famous spreadsheet. And the whole
Lotus Notes, I remember
Lotus Notes came much later, and
Really?
that suddenly became their best-selling product, believe it or not, because they lost the market. Lotus 123 lost the market then to Microsoft Excel, believe it or not, because Excel was all based on Windows, and 123 was based on an old kind of character-based user interface and so on. But they established the market for computer software, because at that time IBM had just released the IBM XT and the IBM AT computers, and you wouldn't buy a computer unless there was software on those systems. And Lotus 123 was one of the few products that ran on those desktops. And that's what established the computer industry, basically. And our job in Dublin, when I was hired by Lotus, was to localize those products into different languages. So they set up what's known as a localization group. And I remember going to the interview, and Alan Barrett, he was my director at the time, asked me a question. He says, "Do you know anything much about localization?" And I hadn't a clue what localization was. I don't know how I got the job, basically, but anyway, I did get the job. And I never turned back since then, because the whole start of localizing software was the localization of text. Originally, it was a very manual process, a very expensive process. And then over a number of years, we developed different tools to kind of make that faster. We developed technology called translation memory, for instance, where we were the first to develop that actually in the industry. So for every time we translated something, we'd store that translation in a database. It was a fairly simple kind of setup. But it meant if we ever saw that translation or that English text come back into the system again, we could say, oh, well, we've got 20 language translations of this. It's all been signed off by a professional translator. We don't have to translate it again. So that kind of reduced the turnaround time for projects and reduced the cost quite substantially.
I remember I did localization for Microsoft way back in the day when they had their localization place in Sandyford. And I was kind of on the periphery of it. But at that time, it was printing books, and you got your CD-ROMs. They were floppy disks. Along with the books,
5 1/4 inch and the 3 1/2 inch.
That's right. And then of course the CD came along, and that got rid of all the books.
Correct. Well, actually, one of the companies that I ended up working in then was Corel, and Corel had this product called Corel Draw 3.0, and it was like the top of the range kind of graphical environment if you were designing. If you see on all those billboards along the motorways and so on, they're typically in those days were designed by Corel Draw, and because they had so much clip art in their products, you would get about 40 to 50 CDs in the box. And Corel Corporation was not only a huge software company, it was the biggest producer of CDs on the planet because there were so many CDs. And if you think about it, nowadays we'd never ship a CD. It's all downloaded by the web, and there's no future in CDs. And in fact, the production company we used over in Blanchardstown, they went into actually producing audio CDs because the market for software CDs just it evaporated, and that evaporated over a period of 3 to 5 years. It just shows it was a very short time span where you were getting software on CDs.
That's right. And I remember Sonopress were one of the big ones here in I think
that was the company we used.
And they were they were remember pressing CDs using the polycarbonate, and that's right. Their business dried up because of that whole.
That was a Canadian company that came over at the same time as Corel. My co-plan and the CEO of that company were best mates basically, and they did a deal to come over and do each other's work, and that's how that they became so big. But they, as I said, they went into audio CD production, and it always amazed me that was a printing process or a plastic compression technology rather than a digital recording process. It was quite incredible.
Very physical thing.
And we used to get the masters sent over to, sometimes it was done in Scotland, but mostly it was done in Birmingham. And that's where the master imprint used to come from. It would take 3 or 4 days to do that. Then you get the master over, and then you can just produce hundreds and hundreds very quickly. So that was the old days. Yeah. But so Lotus was the first development company, localization wing in Ireland. But it was on the back of the government policy of investing in manufacturing plants. So in the good old days, back in the late 80s, early 90s, you used to get a capital grant from the government to build a manufacturing facility. And consequently, Lotus built a manufacturing facility, and they had a printing facility here as well. And those are the days when you bought your product, it came in a nice, colourful box, and it had maybe 2 or 3 manuals in there. So there's a lot of kind of cost of goods and a lot of kind of paper stuff there, you know.
Very manufacturing intense.
Yeah, and Microsoft set up a big manufacturing plant here. All the big guys like Frame, all the Sun Microsystems had their manufacturing plants here. But then the Irish government changed the policy. They said instead of actually investing in plants and machinery, which were capital grants, they wanted to invest in higher IP value jobs. So they changed capital grants into training grants. So we stopped building manufacturing plants and we started hiring engineers, and you got a training grant, it was called at the time. And the training grant was around $3,500 per hired engineer. Wow. Now, to put that in perspective, you were hiring engineers from Trinity College for about $9,000 a year in old money. Now, when I say old money, that was punts instead of euros. And so about a third of what their salary would be, and you get that over 3 years. You get it over 3 years. So suddenly the manufacturing plants started to set up engineering and software plants beside them. So they'd already maxed out the capital grants, and now they had a second kick at the can with IP-based training grants. So that's how the localization industry really kind of set up its roots and became such a success. Because remember, the success of that government policy was that Ireland became known as the Silicon Valley of Europe. That's how successful that particular plant was. Microsoft now, I think they employ about 2,500 people there over in Sandyfoot. Apple down in Cork, I think there's something like 4,500 to 5,000 people down there now. And it was all on the back of moving from manufacturing over to
these high-end jobs.
High-end. It was a higher value. You know. And at the time, remember, the government had introduced not quite free college degrees for engineering and so on, but you certainly only paid your capitation fee, and you didn't have to pay the annual fee. So it became cheaper to go to college, and then lots of other people went to college. And most people, I would imagine, went to college at that stage, and they came out with engineering degrees. So there was a big market for a good supply of low-cost engineers. Now, when I say low cost, it's not that we were paying low salaries here relative to the economy. But if I was to hire, like when I was working for Symantec, if I was to hire an engineer in, say, Silicon Valley, at the time it would have cost me $50,000.
Symantec come into it then. So Symantec, they were a localization entity as well, or were they just software?
Yeah, so I was in Lotus for several years, and Symantec came in. So everybody was following the Lotus model. Okay, so you got the capital grants to build your production plant, and you got the training grants, or the IP grants, as we're called. And then other companies came in, like Microsoft came in and built a manufacturing plant, got the capital grants, then they went into the IP grants as well. And Symantec was a huge company in those days. It was doing about maybe 200 million in sales. So maybe average size or medium size at that stage. And they wanted to avail of the capital grant. So they had a manufacturing plant here. And then they set up a localization group. And they headhunted a number of managers from Lotus at the time, because Lotus was, it used to be referred to as the training ground for the localization industry. You know, we were lucky that we were first in, I suppose. And Symantec was set up by a chap called Stephen Brennan, who was my director over there. And he hired me then as director of engineering. So that's how I ended up working for Symantec. And Symantec, their claim to fame was that Stephen was very aggressive in achieving one objective, which was simultaneous shipment of software products. So instead of actually having a 30-day lag between the English release of the software product and maybe the German and French version, Stephen came up with this vision of saying, what can we do to do it all under one day? So we'd have like 10 language versions of all of the semantic products available on exactly the same day as the English product. So that was called simultaneous ship, or SimShip as we abbreviated it. And he made his reputation around that strategy. So in order to do that, we had to not only localize the products, but we had to build sophisticated technology to help us localize those particular products. So for the first time ever, we started developing visual translation memory tools. So not only could you actually translate the segments or the strings, but you could see where the strings appeared in the software application real time. So you had the context correct for the translator, and if the string didn't fit in, say, a button on a dialog box, they could abbreviate the translation there and then. Whereas if you went back 3 or 4 years previous to that, we'd translate the segments, we'd rebuild the software, and we'd have to test the software to see if there's any string concatenations or truncations in the software. So it was a much more elaborate, slower process. And I have to say, I was part of the engineering team that built those solutions, and we really established this whole concept of SimShip in the market. And then all the other companies started to follow that strategy. So Semantic, being a small company, it was kind of an upstart in the industry in terms of it was setting a new trend. And today, by the way, simultaneous shipment would be standard across every industry now. And in fact, the only industry that hasn't perhaps caught up at that is maybe film and dubbing, and maybe video dubbing.
Even today?
Even today, yeah.
Really?
There's still
a delay.
There's a lag, yeah. So if you look at, say, the release of, say, a movie on Netflix, it'll be probably anything from 15 to 30 days before you see the French version of that, the German version of that, and so on and so forth. Right. And remember, Netflix has a strategy of buying a lot of local content for one reason. It's because it's in that local language. So if you look at Netflix in France, there's a lot of French films there, but you don't see those films on the English version of Netflix. You only see a small percentage. And it's because of that cost of localization and that time lag. Okay, because most people, if you release a product in English on Netflix or a movie, that there's a delay, it's probably several million in lost revenues to that particular company. You know, so that's the reason.
And I suppose we will talk about the AI piece in a short while, but I assume that's where AI will truncate that. We're going to get it even shorter, because it should be able to take something instantaneously and turn it into every language. At some point.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, that's the reason that we set up research labs in Keywords, because AI is a technology that can fundamentally reshape our landscape in terms of the service offerings that we deliver to our clients. I'll give you an example of that. If you go back 10 years ago, we used to translate everything by hand, and that was very expensive. So it costs about 8 cents per word to translate a word in a software product. If we introduce machine translation, which is an aspect of AI, we can reduce that cost by about 50%. Okay, so if we ignored AI or machine translation, that's a closed AI problem to solve. We wouldn't be in business today, because guess what? All of our competitors are using machine translation. Now, if you extend that out to, say, video dubbing and audio dubbing and so on, you can see where AI is going to have a huge impact there. Because at the moment, what we do with films is we take a video, let's take a video, a short video, and what we do is we use STT, speech to text technology. So we basically transcribe that video into text, and then we use machine translation and a human reviewer on that text. And then we can get an actor in to actually read out each of those translated sentences, and then we remix the whole video.
That's how it's currently done today?
That's the way it's currently done today.
Wow, okay, so there's a number of steps in that process.
Yeah, it's a very expensive, time-consuming manual process, hence the lag between an English release of a video and the German version and the French. Now remember, because if you look at, say, Call of Duty is a good example. In that game, there's 20,000 small video and audio files that need to be localized. So we have to do 33 languages of that product. So it's not only an exercise of file management, it's also how can we actually automate a lot of the steps during that file management process. And clearly using AI to create some of the voices synthetically is going to it's just going to reshape how that business is done. Now, and the other thing is, because at the moment it's all human actors in highly expensive recording studios, we could now use that using a computer system with lots of computing power behind it, and generate that en masse at scale at a fraction of the cost of what we're currently paying at the moment.
So you still pay for the Tom Hanks or the Morgan Freeman voice.
Correct.
Through a royalties contract, but they don't have to stand in the studio and record anymore. You can now produce it at a much faster.
Well, we're not quite there today in doing that. But certainly AI has the potential that we can fine-tune models to generate a Tom Hanks voice or a Morgan Freeman's voice and put them in there. Now, there's obviously legislative hurdles to go through in order to that become a reality, because today a lot of those top-tier actors who actually do games. Like if you look at a lot of Tom Clancy games, Tom Hanks is in those games. Like he's one of the primary voices in there. But they've secured their voice, and any synthetically derived works from their voices. So they're very smart in the way they've done this, because 5-6 years ago, people knew that this technology was going to come of age at some stage. And in fact, recently, the Actors Guild in Hollywood have now signed agreements that will facilitate the licensing of actors' voices based on a framework that gives them royalties and so on and so forth. So you could be an actor now that you could sell the IP of your voice. We can synthetically clone that voice, as we call it, and we could use that for the next 50 years and you'd be paid for that. Whereas prior to that agreement being in place, you had to deal with individual actors on a one-to-one basis. So now there's a framework there to make that simple. And I think what's happening is the industry has recognized that AI is going to just reshape that landscape.
For sure,
and you're either outside the landscape or inside the landscape. If you're outside it, you're not going to be relevant to it.
And who decides that? Who decides whether you're tier 2 or tier 1? Because surely the actor will say, "Well, I am the best."
But all actors are tier 1,
of course. See, that's what I'm saying.
But it's the role they play in the different games.
Okay.
So if you have a primary actor, like if you bring in a Tom Hanks to play an actor in, say, a AAA game, which is the games that you'll see on the Sony PlayStation or the 360, the Xbox. They have high fidelity sound production facilities built into those systems, so it's very, very high quality sound. So you're going to need top actors, and you're going to need the original actor, right? Now remember, you're going to need the original actor only in the English game. Go to France and Germany and Italy. Believe it or not, there are actors as equally well known. They wouldn't be as wealthy as Tom Hanks, but they play those roles, and they have done in those games for years and years and years. Okay, so we hire the same actors to get continuity in the game. So if you play, Call of Duty has about, I think, 7 or 8 editions of it now at this stage. You're going to get the same general in them all. Okay, it's Tom Hanks in the English version. It's somebody else across the other ones. So now what we're suggesting is, well, with AI, we could actually clone that voice, and that actor can still get paid for it, but doesn't have to turn up in the studio anymore. Okay. Now on mobile,
it's just like a musician royalties when their song is played on the radio.
Exactly
Same format,
same
framework.
And if you think about the musician can license the actual music and the lyrics. So he has a broadcast license. So if you actually play that song on the radio, you pay a license there. But if somebody takes the music and does a copy of it, they get a different type of royalty. So this is this kind of alternative royalty stream that these actors currently don't take part in. And they need to be, because the industry is going.
Oh, for sure. And this is where AI is such a powerful tool in your industry, in many industries, but specifically to yours, is that it takes the human element gets paid for that, and the return you can then clone that and use it forever and a day, and that person still gets the royalties. That's one area where AI is really advancing in your area. Where else is AI taking over?
Sure. So the other part that we're at the moment, we have, I think, something like 14,000 translators on our database, and these are people that have worked with us and have done a good job, because we monitor and profile their performance, and we want to send more work to them. We want to make sure they're successful, because guess what? If they're successful, we're successful. But to assign a project to that huge volume of translators, in our industry has traditionally been a very manual process. So you have what's known as a resource management team, and the resource management team will get a request in from a project manager. We're looking for 300 translators to work on 10 languages. So we want, 30 language translators per language, and it's a flight simulator. That's the game. Well, actually, when we say it's a game, it came from a gaming industry, but it's now, professional pilots use this. And we have to go off and make sure that they're trained in the terminology that flight simulator uses, which obviously is a regulated industry. And they have to know something about flying, obviously. They have to be, well versed in the use of those abbreviations and technical terms and so on. So we have to manage that kind of community of translators. And then when the job comes into our organization, we have to then reach out to them and ask them, are they available on such and such a date for a period of 3 to 4 months, because there's going to be a lot of new content, new planes and things like that. Very, very manual. So what we're doing now is we're using AI systems to create a recommended ranked list of translators. So instead of our resource management team going into the database and trying to isolate 300 translators that have experience on such and such a game and such a language, what we can use now is AI to profile our translators, monitor how they work on different titles, and then give us a ranked list automatically generated by a computer that says, if I was going to assign this project to 300 translators, here's the 300 translators I would choose, and we've got them ranked. And what we do now is we can send notifications automatically to those 300 to see if they're available. And if not, we can create a second list. So that's a recommendation engine based on AI. Now, to be fair, we haven't fully automated that yet. So what we have is the ranked generation of the lists, but we still have resource management going through this and saying, yeah. And the reason we do that is to build trust in the use of AI.
It's a validation,
at the human level, okay? Because we've got to be careful that, we can't just introduce AI and say that's the end of human in the loop. It's far from it. So there's a kind of a curation, vetting and onboarding. And that's something that they're spending more of their time doing. And that's a better added value to our company than spending all their time, shortlisting 300 translators and then seeing if they're available. So AI in that case there is not replacing a function. It's bringing more focus to a different function that can add more value.
So it's complementing how you do
exactly. Complementary.
And so what does the future look like in your business? So and the future, to try and put a timestamp on it. So in 10 years' time, what will your industry look like on the foot of or on the back of how AI is already infiltrating it? What do you see it look like in 10 years?
Well, you see, it's interesting because AI can have, particularly in the industry that we're in now, which is the entertainment, media and entertainment business, right? So if you look at the moment, 85% of our media and entertainment revenue comes from film dubbing, okay? Now that represents, I think, just slightly under 150 million for us, right? In that small group, it's a relatively small group. But we would be quite fearful that AI is basically going to devastate that group on the basis that at the moment, when you want to dub a movie, you actually use speech-to-text technology that listens to the movie and transcribes it. Prior to that, we'd actually have somebody sitting there watching the movie, transcribing it, or if you were lucky, the client might give you the script of the movie. Now, that's a rare occurrence, believe it or not, because as they're filming these movies, they have script writers on set and they change the script to suit the mood of the actors and so on. So it's not a fixed script in that sense. And then we have to either use machine translation or human translators to translate that script, and then we get actors to act that. So we've got a number of humans in the loop there that are adding significant value to that. But with the pace of development of synthetic voice, we can actually go speech to speech. And we could go speech to speech, including localization in there. In other words, we could listen to a music in English and translate it immediately into German, okay? And that has got to be one of our biggest fears, that the technology, and we view that technology as being available to us in a H3 scenario, Horizon 3, which is anything from 5 years out, five years out, which is quite incredible. And the reason for that is because the industry is going that way. The shelf life of a Netflix movie now is measured in less than 5 to 6 weeks, because once it's out there, people they don't watch it a second time because there's so much choice there. So they've got to be able to localize those movies within that 5 to 6 weeks. Otherwise, there's no point doing it. That's the lost opportunity. And remember, Netflix are still in the content war. So they need more content personalized into each of those markets at super fast turnaround times. And money is driving this whole shift to AI. Now the big fear we have, obviously, as we're a reasonably big company with 12,500 employees. We've last year we did 800 million in sales and so on. But to build some of these models, you have to throw so much computing power at it. It's only the big computer companies that can afford this. Like if you've got 1,000 movies coming out every 2-3 months or every quarter, you're consuming half the computing power or electricity. Of a small country. And the people that can afford that are only the big guys. So AI has that kind of...
Isn't it interesting what the limitations are? So it's not down to the computer capability, it's down to the engine or the fuel to run that capability.
That's what it is.
Unbelievable. It's interesting what you're talking about, because you've worked with Azolla now for many years, you've been the director of the company up until recently, and you're instrumental in how we traveled on our journey. And one of the things that we're now talking about is using speech AI in Azolla.
Sure.
So we see it that where somebody, take it back a couple of years, it was like minimized number of clicks in terms of getting something to do. So something to be recorded or something needs to be done in terms of the task.
Sure.
So if they wanted to raise an instruction in that, if it's a flicking light, or even now where we use sensors that are dictating or sensing a pump that has an issue, and then it's turning that into an action, an alert that it needs to be actioned. And the steps involved in that, we've tried to minimize. We're now at the point at the start again, we're saying, well, if we use speech AI, that first of all, somebody doesn't have to input anything into filling out a form in any shape or form, even if it's a drop down, click, that they walk into a room and they say, they speak into their phone, or the room is listening to a sensor to say there's a flicking light.
Sure.
Now, of course, it should know that already through another technology, a sensor that's there. But let's say we're using speech, and where speech will be able to take that command, fill out a form, create a work order, create an instruction, and through auto allocation decide whether that is an electrician, a painter, a carpenter, or whatever else at the back end. And then the person goes and does. And we can even, at our recent meeting there, where we're talking about, strategy, which is, for us, is within 3 years. It has to be within 3 years because everything's changing so fast for us. Sure. And we're saying that where we were talking about before, localization. So in our world, we were starting to build up to say, okay, so our language is English, and it is built through English. So we were saying, well, if we went to the continent here to French clients or Italian clients, we need to start looking at localization of the language. And we spent a lot of time on iconography and thought maybe through icons we can do this sort of stuff. But now we're saying, hold on a second, let's take a step back. Let's use speech AI because it's only a matter of time before a command going in any language will be deciphered into the language of preference of the software, and it will create in whatever output language we want it to do. So we can skip all this localization, and we see that's where, in our world, where we see speech AI racing through.
No, it's a great use of that, because if you think about it, 5-6 years ago, cars had voice-activated capabilities. And the early cars were terrible at it. You had to train your voice in. So, it would give you a list of things to say to the car, and it would learn through that. So we're seeing the emergence of voice as a composable business unit in terms of the technology. It's not something that it's owned by only a small amount of companies. It's pervasive across everywhere you go. So it's easy to embed, relatively easy to embed voice into your applications, which is great.
It is. So from listening to you, Tony, and also the challenges, right? So what I hear is the capability of generating that computation is the limiting factor. So as you said, in terms of fuel, gigawatt power to
build the model in the first place,
to do it is. And do you see that as the main challenge going forward, or how will that be overcome?
Yeah, well, I think what's going to happen there is you're going to have the likes of, like, if you look at AWS, Amazon Web Services, like, they clearly have the computing power to build these massive models, right? you'd look at the investment that Microsoft made into OpenAI. OpenAI is owned by, I think it's like 55% is owned by Microsoft. They put a 10 billion investment into there recently. And it was a cash in kind investment. What basically Microsoft said to OpenAI was, we're going to give you access to the Azure cloud computing platform, and you can build all your future models. And the value of that is about 10 billion US dollars. It's a smart way to end up owning 55% of a company, I suppose. But you can see there where the big platforms are playing a significant part in building out that technology. And for players like ourselves, we have to now figure out how we can add value to that. Okay, so if you go back to the example I gave about AI fundamentally changing our service offering, it's not going to get us out of the service offering. It means that we have to rethink of where we add value into that service offering. Okay, so if we get to the point in H3, Horizon 3, where we can do speech to speech, okay, where are we adding value there? It almost seems like it's a closed solution. How could you possibly add value there? Well, one area where you can add value is that because we've recorded all these actors over the last 10 years in professional sound studios, we can use those recordings to fine-tune the models. So it's not that we build a base model. What we do is we build what's known as the instruct model, which is the second generation model based on the, say, open source model from, say, OpenAI. So the one that we derive from that, it's a derivative work under legal terms, but it's now customized for Call of Duty. It's customized now for Flight Simulator. It's customized for League of Legends, all the big titles, or Fortnite, all the big titles that we work on. And the reason that the clients will still come to us is because our derivative models, our instruct models, are producing better. So we go from running production studios and recording studios and having sound engineers to having a higher value add based on computer data scientists that actually can customize these models, and we will charge that service. So we'll be selling something different in 5 years. We won't be selling the studios and all the other stuff that come with the studios. It'll be a completely different offering.
Wow, yeah. Now, it's a revolution. I mean, you've got to revolutionize your business because this is where you're going.
But that's why if you look at our share price has dropped by about 40% since the release of the ChatGPT models, and it's because the industry analysts are looking at it and saying, "Wow, AI is going to fundamentally reshape how they do business." And it was ChatGPT 3.5 was launched in November 21, and we have yet to convince the industry that we know we're going to have to reshape the industry and come up with a cohesive and coherent business strategy that says this is what it's going to look like in 10 years' time or in 5 years' time in H3. Yeah. And the reason that we set up research labs was to start getting really curious about that and to figure out what the business will be like. So
because you've got to embrace it. You have to embrace it.
Well, you can't ignore it.
Correct. You stand still, your history. So speech AI is going to become more in every person, because that's what we do. That's how we communicate. As human beings. So speech AI is going to become so prevalent in everything that we do. And where we're testing it on open source that exists right now through platforms like ChatGPT or whatever, where we're asking to read from, not only, so our system has dashboards that are created that we create for our clients, but we ask ChatGPT to tell us in its own words what the dashboards are telling me. Because I don't want to look at the dashboard. So tell me in 30 seconds
analyze this
what
data.
I need to know. And it will summarize very quickly in terms of nothing to see here, or we've got an error, or we've a spike, but again, all within limits, etc., etc. So in a 30-second conversation, it has analyzed 50, 60 sensor data and data impacts and come out and said, that's all it needs to see here. So and that's where we see it coming more and more in what we're building.
It's interesting you talk about dashboards because we've built a technology now that sits on top of our dashboards for project managers. Okay, and so what we look for is a closed solution in terms of problem formulation. As a closed solution, we can probably use AI to that. So one of the things that our project managers want on their dashboards is they want to know all the jobs that need to be delivered today, tomorrow, the end of the week, or within this billing cycle. Okay, so the old way of doing that, believe it or not, would be you'd stick 3 or 4 buttons in the user interface. You'd have an icon that would say for today, for tomorrow, for the end of the week. That's the old way of doing it. But we suddenly realised when we sat down with the project managers, they sometimes want to know all the jobs that are 3 hours in the next 3 hours. So it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. They have to ship everything by 3. So we've 2 choices there. We say, oh my God, we have to put another button in here for 3 hours. Right? It's not. There's going to be so many buttons on the user interface. It's just going to be a mess, right? So now what we allow them to do is we have a data entry, and they can actually type in normal human text. They can just say, list all projects to be completed by 3 o'clock today. That's all they type in, and the actual dashboard will respond to that. So what we're actually doing is we've created a kind of a chat GPT type model, but behind the scenes, that model is instructed to create an SQL query. And we run that SQL query on the database and display the results in the actual table. So now for the first time, and it's kind of exciting time, we've now reached a point where the constraints of the user interface don't limit the functionality of our software anymore, because they're able to have this human conversation. Now, interesting enough, if you run that and you've got speech enabled in the browser, you can actually speak into that.
Don't have to type it.
And we didn't have to write a single line of code to do that. Okay, so it was designed around the concept of typing in a text element and interpreting that and then creating a piece of dynamic code. But it can be voice activated, with literally just turning on the voice agent in the browser, which is incredible.
And funny, we're not where you are, but again, bring it back to very basics. Same thing, through be it ChatGPT or another engine where you again type into or use the command, say, how do I do that? And it can interrogate all the data and say straight away, here it is. And it can put it in its own words or succinct as or short or abbreviated as it has to do it.
Yeah, but see, but it's great to have that level of curiosity now, because make no mistake, everybody's concerned about how AI is going to impact our industry, but they're also very concerned about how can we leverage AI to be relevant in our industries today, tomorrow, and in 5 years' time. And that's a huge worry for many organizations today. Like, for instance, I saw a great use recently. We use Teams in work, and if you record your Teams meeting, it can actually do the minutes automatically for you, including the action items, just by listening to the audio track. It is quite incredible. Now, it's not 100%.
But listen,
when you get it, you have to go through it and you say, well, actually, no, that action item didn't go to Tony. It went to Richard or something like that. But that's the worst we'll ever see, that technology.
Correct. First iteration.
Yeah, so in 2 or 3 years' time, that will be flawless because of the models that they're building. And that's a great use of it. So we're seeing all these uses. I was signing a document recently on DocuSign, and it was a spreadsheet that had. So we have this new. We've adopted this SOX standard now because we're a traded company. And it means that I have to sign off the salary, every week, and it has to be an electronic signature, and it's stored for 7 years or something like that under SOX laws. Knew nothing about it last week, by the way, and came through DocuSign. And the first thing DocuSign came up, said to me, says, "Do you want me to summarize this spreadsheet for you?" So they have this thing called AI Assistant. So I said, I'll
go for it.
I'll try it. First, I never saw the button before in DocuSign. Clicked on it. And it did a reasonably good job telling me what this document was. It knew it was a salary document. It knew it was a gross to net report, because obviously there was a column called gross and there was a net. And it was able to tell me the company name. It was able to get the VAT number, even though the VAT number wasn't on it. Obviously did a search on the VAT number and things like that. And again, I'm looking at that and saying, it's a closed solution.
Sure.
So it's solvable in that sense. It's easy to formulate the solution, right? Formulate the problem. And if you can formulate the problem, it's easy to build a solution. And I just said, that's the worst we'll ever see that. That's quite incredible how that's going to happen. But a future skill that we need to work on is not how to create prompts. It's to formulate problem definitions and solutions better. Okay, and that's not something that we teach our our students in college today, how to formulate problems and how to formulate solutions. We teach them how to solve problems, but not to articulate what the problem is correctly. We give them a problem, create a solution. The real future for this AI is being able to describe the problem correctly and allowing the AI then to actually deliver the solution. Okay, and this problem formulation is not something that we teach in colleges, unfortunately.
Is AI not going to be able to do that too?
Well, interesting enough, it will certainly help us. But remember, there's huge limits on those models that were like the large LLMs, the large language models we're using today. So the way those models work, just think about the maths behind the model. So we're going to throw all this data in there, and the model is going to try and predict the next most frequently used words in the formulation of a problem or a formulation of a solution. So that's the way they work. It's predicting the next word. So what happens is it'll give you a speech that it's seen many, many times in the model because it's the most frequent speech. So the lack of creativity, the lack of exceptionalism that these models are limited by means that we'll always need a human in the loop to start the process. And that's why problem formulation is going to be predominantly a human endeavor, because we have the creativity to create, and we have the reasoning as well. Remember, these models are pretty dumb. There's no reasoning going on. What it's actually thinking about all the time is, what is the next most frequent word that always appears in the context or the constraints that you've given me, and it'll do something to that. That's why it's when you ask it to write a poetry, it can write poetry, but it's not going to be anything that's going to win, a Nobel Prize for poetry. They're not that good in that sense. There's limitations there. So unless there's a massive change in the algorithms that we're using to reward exceptionalism, well, first of all, to identify exceptionalism,
correct,
and then reward it by actually, giving it higher merits in the model, we're going to have models that just give us mediocre results or average results. Now, for many college students,
that's perfectly fine.
They want an average essay.
Yeah, exactly.
And it'll get past the lecturer. But if you want something exceptional, those models can provide that.
Actually, just to finish up, I know that I see some of the lectures, because they're fighting the tide here, where they say, use ChatGPT to write your essay.
Get your outline.
And then I want you to compare with what ChatGPT said with what your own reasoning should be.
Sure.
So you're using exactly what you were saying. You complement, or use the mediocrity that it will give you to start with. Now better that. So say what that is, call it what it is, and then say, well, okay, how can you better that? Or compare it or contrast it with what you know.
Exactly.
So so I thought that was a very good way of using that kind of technology to try and do something about it. Tony, listen, thank you very much for your time.
Sure,
Absolutely
no problem.
It's blowing stuff every time we talk, because your industry is leaping forward. Like, it's not even it doesn't evolve. It's like a revolutionary thing every time we talk, because it's changing so fast. And you're talking about your H3. I'm sure you have a H5, somewhere in the background where you need to be thinking of your fifth horizon, or maybe you can't see that far ahead, because beyond 3 years or 4 years, who knows what it's going to look like? Because
you see, I think if we could classify the level of change as linear, we would be able to have some level of prediction there.
Sure.
But it's exponential, unfortunately.
Right across every industry. And we're into every industry. You know what I mean? It's, when you started in this industry, 25, 30 years ago, you didn't think you'd be in gamification and using speech and gamification, and not only that, but using gamification in things like Flight Simulator, which is now a professional thing, teaching pilots to the flight lines. It's an amazing thing. But Tony, listen, thank you very much for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much.